New York, 8:30 a.m. Marcus Carter stood in front of the towering Brighton and Comby skyscraper, taking a deep breath. His navy blue tie was perfectly straight, and his tailored gray suit fit his tall, broad frame flawlessly. He had walked into many financial institutions before, but this time was different. This time, he wasn't just here for a job. He was here to make a change. Marcus had spent 15 years in investment finance, managing billions of dollars, and graduated from Harvard with top honors. A resume like his should have made him a sought-after candidate at any major firm. But reality was never that simple. Someone like him, a black man in a financial world dominated by white executives, always had to fight for recognition. He looked up at the gleaming Brighton and Comby logo, a financial powerhouse where only a small percentage of employees were people of color. He knew this wouldn't be an easy road, but he wasn't here for easy. As Marcus pushed through the heavy glass doors, the first look he received wasn't one of welcome. It was one of scrutiny. Brighton and Comby's grand lobby was as luxurious as expected. Gleaming marble floors, young professionals in designer suits. But the most striking thing wasn't the decor. It was the uniformity of skin color. Every eye turned toward Marcus, the only black man in the room. He walked toward the reception desk. The white woman behind the counter looked him up and down before speaking.
Do you have an appointment?
I do. Marcus Carter here for the Strategic Finance Director interview.
The woman blinked, slightly surprised at the senior-level title.
Oh, yes, please have a seat.
As Marcus settled into the waiting area, he could hear the hushed whispers from the other candidates, all of whom were white. I didn't think they hired people like that. And maybe it's some diversity initiative? Marcus had heard it all before, but instead of feeling irritated, he simply smiled. They could doubt him all they wanted. He knew his worth. When the recruiter called his name, Marcus stood up and walked through the doors into a luxurious conference room. Inside sat a middle-aged blonde man, David Reynolds, the head of recruitment. David did not stand to shake hands. There was no welcoming smile. Instead, he merely glanced at Marcus's resume before setting it down on the table with a cold, deliberate thud.
Mr. Carter, thank you for coming in, but I believe we've already found a more suitable candidate.
I haven't even had the chance to demonstrate my qualifications.
We don't believe someone like you would be a good cultural fit.
Someone like you. It wasn't just a rejection. It was an insult. Marcus clenched his hands beneath the table, but he didn't let his anger show. Marcus, calmly.
I'd like you to clarify exactly what part of the company culture I don't fit into.
David smirked, leaning back in his chair.
You know exactly what I mean.
A heavy silence filled the room. Marcus took a slow, steady breath. No matter what he said, they had never intended to hire him. But someone had heard everything. Outside in the hallway, Sophie Tran, a young Asian American intern, stood near the interview room. She had heard the entire conversation, and she had recorded it. Sophie could hardly believe what she had just witnessed. A major corporation like Brighton and Co. openly displaying such blatant discrimination? She gripped her phone tightly as an idea flashed through her mind. Marcus stood up and adjusted his suit jacket. He had known from the moment he walked into the room that he was never going to be considered. But instead of showing anger, he simply nodded, his gaze sharp, as he looked straight at David. Marcus, thank you for making it so clear what kind of company this is. Then, he walked out of the room with measured calm, though a storm raged inside him. The interview room door closed behind him, but the story was far from over. As he stepped outside into the fresh air, Marcus didn't feel like he had failed. He felt like this was only the beginning, because when one door closes, a storm is about to break. New York, 7:00 p.m. Sophie Tran sat in her small apartment, her phone resting on the table, its screen displaying the recorded interview between Marcus Carter and David Reynolds. David, in the recording,
We don't believe someone like you would be a good cultural fit.
Those words echoed in Sophie's mind. She knew that if she did nothing, this would all be buried and forgotten. She made her decision. She uploaded the recording to Twitter, adding a caption. "This is how a major financial firm treats a black Harvard graduate. #hire diversity. Stop racism." Taking a deep breath, she pressed post. 8:30 p.m. Social media erupts. Within just an hour, Sophie's post had gained over 50,000 likes and 30,000 shares. The first wave of comments started pouring in. What the hell is this? A major financial firm still engaging in this kind of discrimination? Find out who that recruiter is! #hire diversity now. Brighton and Company must be held accountable. 2:00 a.m. #hire diversity becomes the #1 trending topic on Twitter. Human rights organizations spoke out, demanding an investigation into Brighton and Company. Celebrities and top company CEOs shared the post, condemning the blatant discrimination. Former employees of Brighton and Company started exposing the company's history of racial bias. The media firestorm had officially begun. The next morning, Brighton and Company headquarters. CEO Richard Hamilton stormed into the boardroom, his face tense. Around him, members of the executive board murmured anxiously, discussing the growing media crisis. Richard slammed his fist on the table. "Can someone explain to me what the hell is going on?" Media Relations Report. The original post had reached 2 million likes and over 1 million shares. CNN, BBC, Forbes, and the Wall Street Journal had all picked up the story. A small protest had begun forming outside company headquarters. Financial fallout. Brighton and Company's stock plummeted by 15% overnight. Major clients like Apple, Tesla, and JP Morgan Chase announced they were suspending partnerships. Investors grew nervous, with some already pulling their funds. Brighton and Company was teetering on the edge of the biggest crisis in its history. Richard Hamilton picked up his phone and dialed Marcus. "Marcus, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We need to talk." Marcus smirked. "Now you remember me. We want to apologize and find a way to make this right. Maybe we can negotiate." "No, I don't need an apology. I need action." Marcus hung up. He didn't need their negotiations because he held the strongest card in the game. Brighton and Company Executive Boardroom. Richard Hamilton sat in stunned silence as his assistant walked in with a shocking revelation. "Mr. Hamilton, there's something we didn't know about Marcus Carter." "Speak." "Marcus Carter. He's not just a job applicant." "What do you mean?" He's one of Brighton & Coates' largest investors. He owns 5% of the company's shares. Richard froze. If Marcus decided to pull his investment, or worse, convinced other investors to do the same, the company could face financial disaster. The boardroom erupted into panic. A board member shouted, "We need to contain this immediately. If Carter moves against us, Brighton could collapse." But it was too late. Marcus was already preparing his final move. That evening, Marcus stepped out of his car and stood in front of Brighton & Company headquarters. But this time, he was no longer a job applicant. This time, he was the man who could decide the company's fate. He walked straight into the building, his gaze cold and unwavering. The receptionist looked up, startled. "Mr. Carter, how can I assist you?" Marcus remained calm. "I have a meeting with CEO Hamilton." The elevator doors slid shut, carrying Marcus Carter to the top floor of Brighton & Company headquarters. Outside the executive boardroom, every board member was already seated. The atmosphere was heavy with tension. Inside, CEO Richard Hamilton sat at the head of the table, his expression tight as he glanced out the window and saw Marcus approaching. At the same time, outside the building, hundreds of protesters had gathered, holding up signs. Higher diversity. Equality for all. We will not be silent. The media firestorm had not died down, and today, everything would be decided. Marcus stepped into the boardroom. Richard Hamilton's voice was low and measured. "Mr. Carter, please have a seat." Marcus didn't sit. He stood firm, his sharp gaze sweeping across the room. They no longer saw him as an applicant. They saw him as a real threat. "I don't have much time," Marcus said coolly, "so let's get straight to the point." Richard Hamilton took a deep breath before speaking. "We understand that the company has made mistakes. That's why we'd like to offer you a solution, a leadership position." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly do you want me to do?" "Chief Strategy Officer. We believe that with your vision, you can help restore the company's reputation." The room fell silent, all eyes on Marcus, waiting for his response. But Marcus simply gave a small, knowing smile and shook his head. "I don't need a position in this company. I didn't come here to patch up a sinking ship. I came here to see real change." His words sent a wave of unease through the boardroom. David Reynolds, the same man who had rejected Marcus in the interview, sat in the corner, his face pale. A board member finally spoke up. "Then what do you want, Mr. Carter?" Marcus's gaze was unwavering. "I want this company to change at its core. And that starts with removing people like David Reynolds." Every eye in the room turned to David. Panic flashed across his face as he stammered, "Wait, I was just following company hiring policies." Richard Hamilton's voice was cold and decisive. "David, you're fired. Effective immediately." David's face drained of color. He sprang to his feet, as if ready to protest. But no one was listening anymore. Marcus had won his first victory. CEO Richard Hamilton let out a heavy sigh before making his announcement. Brighton & Co. is committed to changing its hiring policies. Starting today, we will implement the following measures. Key changes: more transparent hiring practices to ensure equal opportunities for all races. Establishment of a diversity and inclusion committee to oversee recruitment processes. A formal public apology. At the same time, Richard Hamilton held a press conference. Standing before dozens of reporters, he admitted, "Brighton and Codham has failed to create an equitable environment. We are committed to making real changes." But what captured the world's attention wasn't Hamilton's apology. It was Marcus Carter's next move. A week later, Marcus held his own press conference. Standing on stage, he looked directly into the cameras. "I declined Brighton and Company's offer because I don't believe in temporary fixes. Instead, I am launching a new investment fund, the Horizon Fund. The goal of this fund is to support Black entrepreneurs and minority-owned startups, giving them access to capital and opportunities they've long been denied." The Horizon Fund launched with an initial $50 million investment from major investors. The crowd erupted in applause. On social media, higher diversity was no longer just a trend. It had become a movement. 1 month later, at Marcus Carter's new office, he stood by the window of a high-rise building, gazing down at New York City. The bright lights below symbolized dreams and opportunities, but not everyone had the chance to rise. The doors that had once slammed shut in his face, he was now the one opening them for others. On his desk sat a carefully framed photograph, Martin Luther King Jr., at the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Marcus ran his fingers over the glass and softly repeated MLK's words. "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." He lifted his gaze, his eyes filled with determination. He knew that the fight against injustice wasn't just his own. It was for an entire generation. Stepping out of his office, he walked toward a large auditorium where hundreds of people were waiting. Today, he would announce his true mission. Standing on stage, he looked directly into the camera and spoke with conviction. "I once thought justice was breaking down the barriers in front of us. But I've realized that true justice is when no one has to face those barriers at all." Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "I have a dream that one day our children will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." But that dream has yet to fully come true. We are still fighting, and today I declare that I will continue that fight. The room fell silent, then erupted in applause. Marcus continued, "That's why I founded the Horizon Fund, not just to invest in Black-owned businesses, but to prove that talent has no color. We can't wait for old systems to change. We must build new ones, where opportunity is truly for everyone." Justice doesn't come from apologies. It comes from action. On social media, the hashtag #higher diversity was no longer just a trend. It had become a movement. A new wave of equity and opportunity was rising, and this time it would not be forgotten. Marcus returned to his office, his eyes once again falling on the framed photo of Martin Luther King Jr. He whispered softly, "Injustice never truly disappears. It just changes form. But so do we. And we will always rise. Stand up when you are rejected, because tomorrow you might be the one making the decisions."